Jay Zigmont, PhD, MBA, CFP, is the founder and CEO of Childfree Wealth, a life and financial planning firm dedicated to helping child-free and permanently childless people. Dr. J is a certified financial planner. He's a child-free wealth specialist, and he's the author of two books, Portraits of Child-Free Wealth and The Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. He's also the co-host of the Childfree Wealth podcast. Welcome, Dr. J.
Thanks for having me. I've known you for a couple of years and you didn't invite me here until now. I've sent enough clients your way. I'm pretty excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here too, and it's not for lack of wanting you on the show. It's just the stars never aligned until now. But here you are, and today we're going to talk about a topic that makes some people a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't it?
I always joke, I talk about two taboo topics at once, being child free and being wealthy. Let's do it.
Right? Right? We were always taught, don't talk about money, it's not polite. So, not having children, especially if it's by choice, seems to bother people. Let's start off with talking about how people end up being child free.
Yeah. So, just terminology to start with, child free tends to be people that don't have kids by choice. Childless tends to be people who don't have kids not by choice. It's not exact, it's not, perfect. But in the US right now, about 25% of adults are child free or permanently childless. Huge number. And I actually did a study on this and asked folks why did they choose to be child free? And the interesting thing was most of them had more than one answer. Okay, like a third of them were like just didn't never wanted kids. But then it went to like finances and medical issues and freedom and the environment and politically like all these great things. And what you find out, and this is going to maybe be a little controversial, but you find out child free folks probably put more thought into not having kids than a lot of parents put into having kids.
Well, one of the things that I hear people say is, oh, you child free people are so selfish. All you care about is yourself.
Yep, we get that selfish thing all the time. And I go, okay, fine. If you want to call me that, that's fine. But then I'll usually turn around to them and go, why'd you have kids? And they go, well, I wanted. I'm like, hold up. You just said you did it for a selfish reason. Now, by the way, that usually starts a bit of a battle. My wife gets mad at me when I do that at parties, but it's true.
It can lead to an interesting conversation. Now, I know that you, in your financial planning practice, specifically work with child free people. And I want to know how that financial planning process is different for them, both in the short term planning and with the long term planning.
Yeah. So when I was studying to become a CFP, the thing that was surprising to me is there's never once a mention at all of a concept of having a life without kids. All of the financial planning that we're taught as CFPs that's built into the software, built into the systems, assume you either have kids or you will have kids, which is an issue because it doesn't fit child-free people. And what happens is if that's your base assumption, the rest of the financial advice becomes a problem. So I like to start at the end and work my way backwards. Most child-free people don't want to pass on money to the next generation, or it's not a priority. The way my wife and I say it is if we have extra money, our nephews will get it. If they get 10,000 or 100,000, that's fine. If they get $1 million, probably made a mistake, which is a different way of thinking of it. Now the goal is not to pass on money. Your net worth is not always going up. It's more like a die with zero. Child-free folks also don't really want to retire in the classic thing. They're like, I want to cut back on work. I want to do something I enjoy. And if you're not going to retire and you're not going to pass the money to the next generation, a lot of the basic assumptions don't fit. And it changes insurance and all of the things. But what you find is one of the fun ones is if you work with financial planners who charge a percentage of assets, their goal is always for your net worth to go up. It actually has a built-in conflict of interest with child-free people. Like it's all of these things you don't even think about that are systemic. Like I'm going to say against child-free people or causing bias.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I like to say to people, you can either have kids or you can have money, but you can't have both. And of course, it's not true, but kids are super expensive. And so people who choose not to have them, I think, have opportunities not only to have more freedom in their lives in terms of job opportunities and travel and just kind of doing what they want, all those selfish things, but they also probably have more financial choices available to them because they're not paying for daycare, expensive extracurriculars, or saving for college, right?
Well, so it's a little bit of a weird thing when you look at the data. Child-free folks are not considerably higher in net worth than parents. In actuality, depending on the study, they're about the same or no statistical difference. But what you find is living a life of child-free wealth gives you time, money, and freedom to do what you enjoy. Doesn't make you rich. Like income disparities still exist, people still struggle. At the same time, there's a really interesting study just came out from Pew Research that looked at adults without kids, and it looked at median income per month for men and women. For parents, the gender gap is about 1,800 bucks a month, which is huge. For men and women who are child free, the gap's like 160 bucks, which statistically is nothing. Like it does give you different options, it does give you a different life, but it really is interesting, particularly for women, that it gets rid of that gender gap.
Well, the gender gap is so important, as you know, given that I work with women who are going through the process of divorce. What we see over and over and over in a very high percentage of the cases, it's the woman who has either scaled back her career or put a halt to her career altogether to raise the children, be their primary caregiver in the home, and manage the household.
Yeah, and what we do with child-free couples, and you'll see that term dinks, dual income, no kids, and I kind of have a love-hate with that one because I don't know if you're a dink or dinky, no kids yet or ever. But what we do with couples is often we'll embrace something called the garter and the rose, where we take turns between who's providing support, that's the gardener, and who's growing, that's the rose. So my wife and I embrace this. My wife got offered a job 1,200 miles away. Awesome. She's the rose. We move, go for the job. It's not a big deal for us to move. Although the funny part is you got to see two mastiffs in the back of a Prius. That was hilarious, especially to watch the reactions to it. But we can do that. So in couples that are child free, you're seeing more of this kind of give and take. And what we try to do with the Garden Rose is we've intentionally put a rotation 5 years, 7 years, you're the rose, then we'll take turns. And it ends up with a bit more of equality and you both get to follow your passion. Because I mean, let's be real. There's still a lot of caregiving, even if you don't have kids, whether it's caring for parents, the stuff in the relationship, the house, like there's a lot of gardening to be done. But maybe we can be a little more, democratic about it. We split it, we take turns, and everybody can grow.
When we're planning our finances and our futures and we are child free, what are some of the things that we really have to be thinking about that we might not pay as much attention to if we do have kids? Like one that I think of is people with kids probably don't think as much about who's going to take care of me when I grow old, right?
I hate this question. I mean, so I get people all the time like, well, who's going to take care of you when you're older? And the answer is the person I pay. I mean, let's be real on that. But that question has a lot of kind of assumptions in there. It's assuming your kids are going to take care of you, which let's look at the data. If you
It's a
look at,
poor assumption. I
well,
already know that answer.
let's look at the real data because, people are going to think I'm wrong. The US Census looked at adults over 55 and they found that childless adults got 2.5% of them got any financial support from their family. So that's like nothing. But they looked at parents over 55 and said, what percentage get any financial support from their family? It's 1.5%. So, to all the parents out there thinking your kids are gonna pay your bills, you're wrong. Like, it's
Okay.
so, yes, child-free people, we know we have to have a plan for long-term care. We know we have to figure out who's gonna make decisions for us. We're not making assumptions around it. My goal with my clients is by mid-40s to have a plan in place for long-term care, whether that's, insurance, pay out of pocket, even if they are gonna rely on Medicaid. I don't love that choice, but that's up to them. But they're making a conscious choice of who pays that bill. And it is really expensive. It's $115,000 a year on average. Men will spend 2.2 years in care, women 3.7. Huge, huge cost. The difference is I got child-free clients. I had one that she was 29 and asked me to get a quote for long-term care insurance. Now I don't sell insurance, but I work with some carriers. And I went to the carriers, they're like, "Yeah, we can even get you a quote till you're 30." I was like, "Okay." But they're like, "Who in the world is asking questions about long-term care at 29?" And the answer is child-free people.
Right. Well, you mentioned making decisions. Who is going to make decisions? When people have kids, it is typical that they will choose a child to say this person's going to be in charge of the finances or medical decisions when we're no longer able to do that. Who's doing that when someone is child free?
Yeah, this is my nightmare. I've spent 3 years trying to figure out solutions for this. And the issue is most of the government and healthcare systems are all created around next of kin. Like nearly all. I probably could almost say all, but I'll get caught on that somewhere. And if you don't specify someone in your will to get your stuff, the state actually can get your stuff. What's left over can go to the state. And I was meeting with banking regulators the other day, and I asked them, what's their process if they can't find next of kin, child-free person? They're like, "Oh, we listed it on our website." And I'm like, "So I've got to go to all 50 states and see if my cousin died?" And they're like, "Yeah, people don't find it, so we just end up taking the money." I'm like, "All right, well, that's set up that way." Because the problem is you need to put down in your paperwork who's going to get your money, that's the will, who's going to make decisions for you, your executor, medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney. And with 32% of child-free folks being single, not married, you have a huge barrier of like, I don't even have a spouse to do it, and I don't have next of kin. The system breaks. If you're in California or Arizona, you can appoint a professional fiduciary to do this for you. If you were in the other 48 states, you're pretty much out of luck. And I say that lovingly, but what'll happen is a trust company can serve as your medical power attorney, financial power attorney, and executor, but they charge percentage of assets as a whole. Well, if you're going to tell them you're dying with zero, you're a terrible client to them. Like they're not going to take it on, and they're not going to take on that risk. An attorney will often be your financial power of attorney or your executor, but they don't want to touch the medical part. So, like, my question is always if I get in a car crash, my wife and I are in a car crash, who makes our medical decisions, who makes our financial decisions, and who lets our dog out, which is all stuff next of kin hopefully takes care of. But what do we do for child-free people? And it's something I've been working on for years. I've went out to a bunch of companies trying to convince them to fix it, and nobody's really jumped on it. So we're actually going to be launching a product later this year to be child-free people's executor, medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney across all 50 states. Because the other problem is they move all the time. Like, if I have that person in California and I'm in Maine for the next 6 months, can they cover me? So we're trying to build a solution for it, but I'll tell you, the system is fighting it. When I talk to the banking regulators about it, they're like, "We've never heard about this issue." And I'm like, "It's 25% of the population." And I'm like, "Have you ever seen somebody fix it?" And they're like, "Nope." And that's a nightmare.
It sounds like it's going to be something complicated for you to establish, given that we have 50 states with different rules.
Oh, it's a legal nightmare. We actually hired a team of legal interns for a summer just to look at every single state's rules to figure out what goes here and how does this go and how it's an interesting thing because the issue was we couldn't do just one state because then every time, I the editor for my book, she and her dog lived in a different Airbnb each month across the country. Like I wouldn't be able to serve her as a client. Like, but that's normal for our child free people.
Mhm. Okay, I want to move towards talking about child free people who are divorcing. I want to start though with the marriage issue because if people are choosing to be child free, should they even get married to begin with?
So clients ask me this all the time. And my first question is, do you need health insurance? And they say no. I said, well, then you probably don't need to get married. And it's kind of tongue in cheek, but the reality check is marriage is a system that was really designed for you're going to have kids. Like there's a whole bunch of history around it, a whole bunch of stuff around patriarchy. There are occasionally some tax benefits, but for some couples that's actually a tax penalty and it becomes harder to take everything apart. So what I'll ask the clients is, all right, cool. You've been a long-term couple. You want to work through this. Do you want to work on the same set of goals or not? Which tells me if we're doing financial planning together or as roommates or kind of a combination. And what's the best way to document that? We can do partnership agreements. We can do, the wills, power of attorneys, all that, which will give you a lot of the same protections as marriage, but it also builds in there what are your clauses to get out? How do you do this? How do you break things up to the point where marriage is an option for child-free people, not a requirement.
I feel like a lot of them would say to you, but we want the commitment of marriage.
I don't hear that. So,
You
like,
don't? Okay.
so, this great example in my first book. I had a woman I was talking to, and it's actually one of those cautionary tales. Her husband dies just about at 50, and they hadn't done any of the paperwork. They had been together for 18 years or something like that. And the issue was they didn't do wills, power of attorney, all that. So it made some issues. But we see a lot of alternative couples, alternative groups, alternative family structures that are just as committed without that legal document.
Sure.
I mean, I got people that have been married, quote unquote, married for decades that have no piece of paper.
Right.
They call themselves each other, their husband and wife or whatever else it is. But I think what's happening is a lot of folks are looking at kids and kind of questioning, should I do it? They're looking at marriage, going, should I do it? There's all these things and they pause. And when you pause, marriage, like, it's not all it's cracked up to be for some people.
Right, right. Okay, so moving towards divorce, I've worked with plenty of women who don't have children. They're now getting divorced and they're saying, wow, I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Who's going to take care of me? All those kinds of things. Let's talk about some of the things that we need to think about if we're child free and getting divorced.
Yeah. So this is one of those issues that fires me up a little. I was at a conference and this VP was talking about stuff, and they said, if you're child free, getting divorced, no, sorry, if you're getting divorced and you don't have kids, it's easier. And I'm like,
Mm,
like, that's a big assumption. Like, it's different. It's not exactly easier or harder. I think what I tend to find with those that are divorcing, going through it, whatever it is, there's often income disparities in the couple. And it's not always kind of like, male, female, who, whichever roles because of the gender gaps disappearing. And we start getting into this discussion about, yours, mine, and ours, how we split it. That's where you come in and you figure that out. But then afterwards, it becomes this question about, like, did we have a clean break? I've had a lot of work with clients where they've got a legal divorce, but like still got accounts that still have multiple names and still have things in your credit. But it becomes a nightmare. And if we go back to that power of attorney thing, I'm amazed how many times people don't change that. Where they're like, "Oh, I divorced my spouse, but they're still listed as the one making decisions for me." Like, that to me is really scary.
can you imagine having an ex husband with the ability to decide to turn off life support?
Oh, well, I mean, and I had one, and I think it's not gonna still this way because it bothers me, and they left them in the will to inherit the money too. I'm like, "Well, if they get to choose to take off the life support and they get the cash, I guess they're getting their revenge," or whatever it might be.
Right? Well, it becomes even more interesting when someone gets divorced, doesn't take their ex out of their will, and then gets remarried, then passes away, only for their current, most recent spouse to find out everything is going to the ex spouse.
Yeah, I actually had a friend this happened to. He died young, but, he actually had kids, and he was remarried, and when he died, he had a pension, and his ex-wife got the pension, and his new wife with the new kids was like, "Can I get some?" And she's like, "Nope." Like, and that was it. That was the end of the discussion.
Yeah, it's just like having someone still as a beneficiary in a life insurance policy. No one's giving that money back. If they received it from the life insurance company, they're going to say, "See ya."
Yep, and I think part of it is so I this one I'm thinking of, they were like, "Hey, I don't have somebody else's name to put there." I'm like, "Okay, you didn't trust this person enough to still be with them, be married to them, whatever it is. Do you still trust and make the decisions?" And this is where we get into kind of like, well, yeah, kind of. Like, I mean, I did spend a lot of time with them. I'm like, you know, you need to change this. Like, you need to pay a professional to do these roles for you, or you need to do something because that relationship is already soured. I just don't want an opportunity for abuse, really, to be
Right.
written in paperwork.
So the learning point here is number one, divorce isn't necessarily easier if you don't have children. Yes, you don't have to go through a parenting plan and all those kinds of things, but you still have complicated financial issues potentially that you have to sort out. And the second learning point is that when the divorce is being finalized, you need to make sure that you're closing all of these loops, changing beneficiaries, changing powers of attorney. getting rid of the accounts that have both of your names on them. I tell people, go run that credit report and go through every credit card one by one. And if both of you are on the account, it needs to be closed or have a name taken off of it. Personally, I prefer closed just because it
Mhm.
ensures that nothing else can happen with that card going forward. But those are really important things to remember.
Yeah, and I think one of the things and the reason why some people don't make the change is, like, they don't have a support network to help them through it. Which can be professionals, but it also can be friends, families, others. Um, 32% of child-free folks will never marry. So, there's a huge single, we call them soloists, single population with no kids. And there are communities together. And I think if you can find a community to move into so you have some good connection after the divorce, that tends to help. I think it's often overlooked, but you just left, you know, whatever, you're married for 5, 10, 15 years, left living with somebody for that entire time. And now you're all alone. And that can be really, really hard if you're truly doing it alone.
So, if I'm a woman getting divorced, okay, I've got a new financial future ahead of me. It's the perfect time for me to sit down with a financial planner to go through my financial life and get all my legalities set up and all those kinds of things. It seems to me that there would be a benefit to working with someone like you who knows what to look out for with issues with child free people. Yes?
There is. And I think if I had my choice, I want you to start working with me about 6 months before the divorce because there are some things, and I'm sure you run into this every day, that make sense legally, that don't make sense financially, and vice versa. And you need to understand what you're agreeing to. And you have to understand your financial situation because unfortunately, if you've been the non CFO spouse, you've been not managing the finances in the relationship, there's a knowledge debt. And your ex may take advantage of that. So how do we
Hmm.
set up systems so that you're comfortable, so that you have support? I had somebody the other day, I'm like, "Well, I can't get divorced because of X, Y, and Z." And I'm like, "Well, let's do the budget. Let's run the numbers. Let's run." And I'm like, they started to realize, "Oh, I actually can do that." Yeah, but you didn't understand your numbers, you didn't understand your system, you didn't understand your options, you didn't understand what's going on and how the process is. And working with a comprehensive certified financial planner who understands you. My specialty, I work with child-free people. If you're a parent, I have a colleague that runs a place called The Wealthy Parent. Like, go there. Like, go to people that know you, know your life, and can help you from that lens.
Yeah. I talk in my book about the knowledge gap when it comes to divorce, right? It is just very typical that one spouse managed the money and took more control of it in a very high percentage of the marriages. And so if you're getting ready to get divorced, your number one step is to start gathering information and start studying up and figuring out how much money you have, where it is, and what your money has been spent on. And if you can figure out those three things, you're going to be in such a better position when you're negotiating that divorce.
True. And I actually will push a little bit further. We did a recent episode on our podcast talking about this. If you're in the couple, I don't care which gender you are, what member you are of the couple, you both need to understand the finances. Not just
Yes.
let one some person do it. And I've unfortunately had too many cases where either a spouse died or was disabled, where, like, all of a sudden, quick, like, it's all yours, and it's a nightmare. I
Right.
I had to do this for a family member. We had a family member pass. It took me 3 full days to find all the information, and I know what I'm looking for, and I'm like, "How in the world can people without a financial background do this?" And I think it's one of those things, like, no matter where you are in a relationship, you need to at least understand what the financial situation is. Somebody could pay the bills. Like, I mean, that's just a mechanic, but you need to understand what are our accounts, where they go, and all that. And then if something goes wrong, you'll be there. And I think the other thing that protects you from is financial infidelity. I don't know how many times I've run into people like, yeah, that's a bad situation. They're taking advantage of you. I've had some where it's taxes related. I've had some where they're gambling, like all different types of things. And they can hide it because the other person doesn't know what's going on. Like, you need to be aware of your finances. And for taxes, remember, if you're married, your name's on the bottom of that. So if they run up $100,000 bill at IRS, good chance you owe half of that too.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, "Oh, our bills are all on auto pay. So if something happens to me, it'll be fine." Well, guess what? The mortgage might be on auto pay, but if your spouse doesn't know which account it comes out of and whether there's enough money in that account, you could be in trouble.
Absolutely, and I have a in case I die file, and everybody should have one. I encourage people there's actually a product called the next of kin box, knock box, great one to put there, and yes, on mine, it says to my wife, "I love you. You're good for 3 months," because, like, I have enough money places, it's moving, and then the system will start to break. I'm just calling that out, and I want her to have a little bit of space, but she needs to understand, "Okay, our bank accounts are here, you know, this is where the money comes from, this is where the checks get deposited," just enough to be okay while they're grieving.
Right. Okay, as we're wrapping up, I want to talk about your most recent book, The Child Free Guide to Life and Money.
Yeah, it was one of those, interesting things that every once in a while, you get some surprises, and I had a publisher reach out to me, and I'd done my first book and be like, "Hey, do you have a second book?" And if you ask an author, "Do they have another book?" The answer is always yes. But the question they asked me was, "Why aren't there other books about child-free finances?" And I was like, "Great question. Let's fix the problem." And this, as far as we know, is the first book on life and financial planning for child-free folks. And what you're gonna find is the first half is all about what life do you wanna live? Because that's actually the hard question for child-free people. If you're not gonna follow the standard life scripts as go to school, get married, all that fun stuff, what do you do with your life? How do you make an impact? How do you make sure your money matches your values? So the first half is all about life stuff. Second half goes in the finances. And we outline a program we call the 8 no baby steps. Those who have followed Dave Ramsey may be familiar with the 7 baby steps. Well, we got our own flavor. And it really starts talking about how your finances change. Like, for example, for child free folks, life insurance has very little value, almost no value for soloists. So maybe we can skip it, but we must have disability insurance. If you're single and you don't have anyone else to rely on, you must have disability insurance. So it's these things that change. And when people have read the book, they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or if they've worked with a financial planner, like, well, my financial planner never told me that. Well, because they didn't know that either. They're just putting the same prescription for everybody. And that's what I'm hoping to change.
Sounds like a fantastic roadmap for people who are child free. Jay Zigmont, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to put a link to the book in the show notes. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me.